The death of Sarah Everard, who went missing after walking home in South London, sparked protests about women's safety and prompted a huge number of women to share their experiences on social media.
Soon after, the hashtag #NotAllMen began trending on Twitter, with many men saying they felt demonised. So do they have a point? Or do more men need to accept responsibility for helping women to feel safe? Well, we're joined by David Challen, whose mother was jailed for killing his father after years of abuse. David and his brother successfully campaigned for her conviction to be quashed on the grounds of coercive control. We're also joined by rapper Guvna B, who has written a book about the dangers of toxic masculinity, and former England footballer Graham So is also with us. So much to talk about here. Let's come to you maybe first of all, Graham. Why not? Because in sport, we see sort of what we consider typical examples of masculinity, don't we? Which many people would argue are just human traits, not even masculine traits, but competitiveness, shows of defiance and aggression even on the pitch, if you like, or in the game. We see that, and it's useful in sport. But is that part of the problem, that then that gets connected with a way of behaviour that means all men get dragged into a negativity?
Well, you just described me as a professional footballer with that list there, Kate. I think the thing is, you've got to separate professional and elite sport, and it's not just football, all sport, versus coaching of young people, how we treat young people, boys and girls, and the messages we give them about being a boy or being a girl. I think it starts at that point as well. Education is the same. They're the building blocks for how you perceive yourself and how you are as a person. Certainly from an elite sport point of view, I make no apologies for the way I was on the football pitch. I had to be aggressive. I had to be feisty and determined and really be a product of the environment in order to succeed. But I think the important thing is that you separate that from when you step over the white line coming off the pitch, and then your behaviour, I think, has to meet very different standards.
I suppose, Graham, it's not just about you coming off the pitch, is it? It's about people watching you on the pitch. And the argument might be that it's that sort of behaviour that becomes connected with male behaviour.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the important thing is, and only speaking from my own perspective, you have to own your behaviour. And if I made plenty of mistakes as a player. You just showed a photo there of Robbie Fowler and myself, where we had a very an awful clash between us, and we both had to deal with that in our own ways. Robbie apologised afterwards, albeit some time afterwards, but understood that his behaviour at that point was irresponsible, I would say. But I've done the same thing. I've had flashpoints on the pitch where I've had to take responsibility, and as role models, inverted commas, as you become as players, you do have responsibilities. But at the same time, you have to put that in the context of the environment of elite sport. So I think it's important to separate those things and make sure that the messages you're passing to people, if you do make those sorts of errors, are this isn't acceptable, this isn't behaviour I'm proud of, but I've learned from that and I'm going to move on. And I think that's the most important thing, is making people aware of their behaviour and meeting them where they're at. And some people are further along on that experience. But in terms of sport in general, I think it's absolutely vital that we make sure that we give young boys, if we're talking specifically about young boys, the opportunity to be themselves and to share their emotions, not to sort of be tough and don't talk about things, don't get upset about things. And that can start on the football pitch, of course. You've got to work collaboratively as a team on a pitch, and you should be able to do that on the pitch to win a game, but also off the pitch to share your experiences and maybe your vulnerabilities.
Yeah. David Challen, you have a unique position in this discussion. Your mum was the victim of coercive control with devastating results for the family. The question I think that people are asking is, to what extent is this a problem with all men? And to what extent is it a problem with individual men? And I think, you know, when a lot of good men sit around talking about how important it is to make sure women feel safe, are the bad men, the ones who are responsible for the toxicity and violence, are they the ones who are listening and taking part in the conversation?
I think the main thing we don't want to do is demonise men, and I don't think that is happening. I think not all men represents a small, misguided group of men that are struggling to engage on the issue. You know, it's what about men? And yes, a lot of men die too, but when knife crime happens in inner cities, you know, there is outrage, it has got on the front pages, but the immediate conversation isn't from women, what about women? And I think that's really interesting. And I think it's also very interesting that when it happens, that the police don't tell young men to stay inside, but when it happens to women, they tell them to stay inside. And I think it's talking about that conversation of the restrictions of women, that men's lives are imposing on them. And, you know, they're imprinted with fear from harassment. You know, 18 to 24-year-olds, 97% have experienced sexual assault. That's an awful lot of women who have an experience and are informed by that and are asking men to engage on this. So I think it's important just to recognise that there's a lot of men who are recognising women's experiences now. They should have recognised it before. That, you know, of course, the scale of male violence and women that are killed, the majority, 97% of killers are men convicted of murder and manslaughter. So it's really recognising the problem here, you know, having a discussion, talking about it and engaging men, and then what can we do? What can we support? You know, get engaged in the domestic abuse field. It's happening right now. Migrant women aren't being supported. That's crazy, right? Decriminalisation of rape is 98.5% of rapes aren't prosecuted. That's crazy, right? There's so many ways to get involved and have a conversation about this.
Yeah, we've just been talking about, with Graham Lasso, Governor B, about role models and responsibility. And of course, in music, there are, you know, role models and responsibility on a massive scale. You've written about toxic masculinity. What do you think that is? And as somebody in music, what do you think the responsibilities are to your listeners?
Yeah, I was conditioned from a young age that, you know, what makes a man is strength and dominance and never crying and getting on with things really quickly. I think growing up on a council estate had a part to play in that. And I think culturally, being a first generation Brit and watching my parents having a couple of jobs at a time played a part too. And I just kind of got on with it. But when my dad passed away quite suddenly in 2017, I tried my best to do all those things, you know, stiff upper lip, and it ended up in me breaking down. And I think toxic masculinity is when your mind and your body is telling you that it's okay to be vulnerable and you need to be honest and embrace weakness, but you fight against that because of the ideals that society has conditioned us to believe, like this is what makes a man. That's when it becomes toxic. You know, I think strength is a great thing. I think never crying is a good thing also, but we have to listen to our minds and our body. And I think in terms of, you know, how it affects women, I don't know everything about women, but just from listening to the conversations over the last couple of weeks, a running theme is that they feel unsafe, and that's through no fault of their own. And yeah, not all men are bad, not all men are predators, but just because you're not doesn't mean that this issue doesn't exist. And I think it's strange when the first reaction is one of defense and not compassion, you know.
And what about the language in music and the images in music? You know, to what extent does that need to be changed, do you think?
Well, ultimately, music is just a reflection of society. Yes, there are violent messages in music. Yes, there are misogynistic messages in music. None of my own, but they do exist. But the reality is, if you took music away, if you took hip hop away, if you took grime away, if you took drill away, misogyny would still exist. Violence will still exist. And I think we have to work harder at getting to the root cause of why these messages are being displayed. Music is just, you know, it's very surface level. It's at the end of a problem. It's not at the root.
No, but it does have influence, doesn't it? It does have influence on young people who are fans of the wonderful music. Those words and those images are contained within that.
I think everyone's good at passing the buck. My mum always said to me when I was growing up, it takes a village to raise a child. It's not just the responsibility of a musician or a footballer, it's the responsibility of everyone, the parents, the education system, the government, the shopkeeper, the bus driver. Everyone's got to chip in, look in the mirror and think, what can I do to create an environment where young people can thrive emotionally, mentally, physically? I remember being on the beach in Ghana a few years ago, and I saw this fisherman put in a load of crabs in the bucket, and every time one of the crabs would get to the top of the bucket, another one of the crabs would put it down. And that basically represents, you know, the world that I'm coming from. People lack opportunity, and so they turn to harming each other, and it's no different in music. But if the environment they're in, which is the bucket, doesn't exist, or it's one that causes them to thrive, then we don't have all these issues.
That's the goal, isn't it?
Yeah. You all have very sensitive experiences and understandings of the problems that have arisen since the vigil and the experiences that women have shared. You know, not all men do not need to be demonised in this discussion, and you've all, you know, clearly pointed that out. But if there is one thing that you've taken from what happened over the weekend and what women have said about what's happened to them, that you think would change things for the better for everybody to come together and change things for the better, what would they be? David, start with you.
I mean, I was at the vigil recently, and you know, I saw a sign that said "Male silence is violence," and for far too long, women have been having this conversation. I thought it's domestic abuse conferences filled with women praising me for being a man speaking out. It's very unique, very rare, and that's really embarrassing. I think really embarrassing. So I think just engaging, talking about it, you know, follow some accounts. Just get started right now. You know, Southall Black Sisters, Centre for Women's Justice, Women's Day. Start just investigating, seeing what's happening online. You can engage. Just listen to women's experiences. Listening is important, and forming your reaction, and then have a reaction to it. Engage other men.
Graham Lasso?
Yeah, I think the fact that you know, the conversation about men saying it's not all men, we all have a responsibility as men. So it is all men in terms of how we can change the environment for women to feel safe and comfortable. Obviously, it's societal as well as environmental in terms of the places we live. But for me, it's about, we all have a responsibility. You know, I want to protect all the amazing women in my life and make them feel that they're safe, and they should be. It's a human right to feel safe. It shouldn't be something that has been talked about for 40 years now or longer. So I think working together as men and women and dealing with that common ground and creating a real movement of change and action is absolutely vital. That's got to be the next step of this, I think, upsurge of awareness and anger that's justifiably felt by women.
Had a lot of comments this morning, a lot of them from mums and dads of young men, teenage boys, saying it is very tough trying to guide and raise teenage boys at the moment. They feel demonised. We know that statistically, actually, young men are more likely than anyone else to be the victims of violent attacks, not necessarily the sexual offences that predominate among women, but it's a fearful time for them too, plus dealing with the demonisation. That's the challenge, isn't it?
And Governor B, just, you know, sort of doing the consultation on what you might change. I mean, also bearing that point in mind, what is it for you has been the sort of dominating thought in the wake of what's happened?
I think men have to hold their friends, their family members, everyone in their circle that is male accountable. I also think men have to take care of their mental health so they can thrive in that area. It helps us view the world and the people around us in a healthier way. I think we should fight for the oppressed, and those who hold power should do something with that and take that responsibility serious. When I think about my mum, I ask myself, who are the most oppressed people in society? Black people and women. My mum is both of those things, and somehow managed to raise 2 children by fighting against, you know, oppression and unconscious bias. In this conversation, we can't forget to include and fight for Black women. You know, unfortunately, police brutality and women being targeted didn't start with Sarah Everett. Her and her family need our love, our prayers, and justice, but so did the family of Nicole Smallman, Bieber Henry, Blessing Olusegun, black women who lost their lives in tragic circumstances and are yet to receive justice. And I think we need a holistic approach to this situation.